Everyone laughed when a struggling single mom inherited a crumbling castle covered in moss. But when the appraiser's hands began to shake, she realized her uncle's worthless gift was hiding a secret that would change history forever. Stay till the end. You won't believe what she found inside. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The lawyer's office smelled faintly of dust and old paper. Outside, rain tapped against the window in slow, uneven rhythms, as if the weather itself couldn't decide what kind of day it wanted to be. Sarah Brennan sat in a stiff leather chair, clutching the strap of her worn purse. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in an office lined with mahogany shelves and gold-lettered law books. But life had a strange way of throwing you into rooms you didn't belong in. "Miss Brennan," said Mr. Harrison, a thin man with silver hair and a tired voice, "your Uncle Theodore left specific instructions in his will. You are to inherit Thornfield Castle and the land surrounding it." Sarah blinked. "A castle? That can't be right." Mr. Harrison gave her a sympathetic look over his glasses. "It's quite right. I've reviewed the documents myself. The property is located in northern Maine, abandoned for decades. He never lived there, but the deed is in his name." Sarah let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You're telling me that a woman who can barely pay rent now owns a castle?" The lawyer didn't smile. "Sometimes the universe has a sense of irony, Miss Brennan." He slid a brass key across the desk. It was heavy and ornate, the kind of thing that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Your uncle wanted you to have this." Sarah hesitated before picking it up. The metal was cold, engraved with a symbol she didn't recognize, a compass rose with tiny letters etched around it. "Why me?" she asked finally. "My uncle barely knew I existed." Mr. Harrison folded his hands. He was deliberate in his decision. He said you were the only Brennan who knew the value of perseverance. The words hit her harder than she expected. Perseverance. Maybe that was just a fancy way of saying stubbornness. The only thing that had kept her and her daughter Emma from drowning in bad luck these past few years. That night, Sarah sat at their tiny kitchen table in their cramped apartment, the key lying between a half-empty mug of coffee and a stack of unpaid bills. The fluorescent light flickered above her, buzzing like an old bee. Emma, her 8-year-old daughter, was coloring quietly at the other end of the table. "Mom?" she asked without looking up. "Why are you staring at that key?" Sarah smiled faintly. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About whether a moss-covered castle in the middle of nowhere is worth the gas money to go see." Emma perked up instantly. "A castle? Like in the stories?" "Something like that. Can we go see it?" Sarah hesitated. There were bills to pay, a double shift waiting at the diner tomorrow, and a car that rattled every time she turned left. But there was also something else, a pull she couldn't explain. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe desperation. Or maybe she just needed something in her life that didn't feel like survival. "Yeah," she said finally. "We'll go." 2 days later, Sarah's beat-up Honda Civic was loaded with sandwiches, blankets, and a nervous kind of hope. The drive north stretched on for hours, city lights fading into pine forests and winding country roads. Emma kept her camera ready, taking blurry pictures of everything: road signs, trees, a moose crossing. "Are we really going to live there?" she asked for the 10th time. Sarah laughed. "Let's just look first, okay?" The GPS died 2 hours from their destination, leaving them with handwritten directions from Mr. Harrison. "Turn left at the lightning-struck oak. Follow the stone wall for 2 miles. Look for the iron gates." When they finally reached the gates, the world seemed to exhale. The rusted iron arches leaned to one side, the hinges groaning as Sarah pushed them open. The dirt road beyond was swallowed by trees, their branches thick with moss. It felt like stepping into another century. "Mom," Emma whispered, "it looks spooky." Sarah squeezed her hand. The best adventures usually do. The path wound upward until suddenly the forest parted, and there it was, Thornfield Castle. The structure loomed from the earth like something torn from a dream. Massive stone walls draped in ivy, turrets reaching toward the gray Maine sky, windows dark and hollow. The entire building seemed alive, breathing slowly under the weight of decades. Emma pressed her face against the car window. "It's real," she breathed. "Yeah," Sarah whispered, "it's real." She parked near the crumbling driveway, weeds growing through the cracks. The air was heavy with the scent of rain and old stone. Together they walked to the front door, a towering slab of oak banded with black iron. The ornate key slid in easily, turning with a deep, echoing groan that reverberated through the walls. Inside, the silence was immense. Dust drifted through beams of light from the broken roof. The grand staircase rose like a spine into the shadows. Murals covered the walls, faded hunting scenes, constellations, strange floral patterns. Emma gasped. "It's like Sleeping Beauty's castle." Sarah nodded slowly. "Just sleeping for a very long time." They wandered room to room, their footsteps soft on the stone floors. Most of the furniture was gone or covered with sheets, but some pieces still stood, relics of another life. A cracked piano in the parlor, a long dining table set for guests who never came back. Then Sarah noticed something odd. A small door tucked behind a moldy tapestry. It looked newer than the rest, solid, heavy, with a modern lock that gleamed faintly in the light. She tried the key, but it didn't fit. "What's in there?" Emma asked. Sarah stared at the lock. "I don't know." When the sun began to set, painting the castle gold, they sat on the hood of the Honda, eating sandwiches and staring at their strange inheritance. "Are we going to sell it?" Emma asked. "I don't know yet." "I think it's beautiful," Emma said. "It's like it's waiting for someone to wake it up." Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe that someone's us." As the sky darkened and the forest began to whisper with night sounds, Sarah felt the cold metal of the key in her pocket, heavy, deliberate, and alive with a mystery she couldn't yet name. She didn't know that someone was already watching from the trees beyond the gates. They woke up in a cheap roadside motel off Route 2, the kind of place where the carpet smelled like smoke and the vending machine in the hallway still sold off. Brand sodas nobody had heard of. Emma was asleep on the other twin bed, wrapped up in the thin motel blanket like a cocoon. Sarah sat on the edge of her own bed, elbows on her knees, staring at the brass key in her hands. It hadn't felt real last night. Now it did. She owned a castle. Not a metaphor, not a fairy tale. A literal stone fortress in the woods of Maine that looked like it had been dropped there by accident. And she had no idea what she was supposed to do with it. She came back from the motel continental breakfast with 2 styrofoam cups of coffee and a plate with a pair of bagels and 1 bruised apple. Emma sat up, hair sticking up in every direction. "Are we going back today?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "Yeah, we're going to make a real list this time. What's broken, what's leaking, what's dangerous, what we can fix on our own." "And the little door," Emma said immediately. "We have to open the little door." Sarah smiled. "Yeah, that too." They drove back to Thornfield as the morning mist lifted from the trees. The road in was quieter the second time. Less dream, more weight, less magic, more responsibility. Sarah noticed things she hadn't the night before. Parts of the outer wall had collapsed. The roof line on the west turret had sagged. Some of the windows had actually been boarded up from the inside, which didn't make sense in an abandoned for decades kind of way. When the castle finally came into view, Emma whispered, like she was in church, "Hi again." Sarah parked in the cracked circle of what had been a driveway 100 years ago. "Okay," she said, taking a breath. "Rule 1, you don't wander alone. You stay where I can hear you. I mean it." "I know. I'm serious." "I know," Emma said again, softer. "I'll stay with you." They went inside. In daylight, Thornfield felt different than it had the evening before. Less haunted, more interrupted, like somebody had been living here right up until the day they weren't. There were footprints in places that shouldn't have had footprints. Drag marks on the stone in the great hall. The corner of an old tarp poking out from under a staircase. A cigarette butt, not old, left near a cracked window. Sarah crouched and frowned at it. "Mom?" Emma asked quietly. "Is somebody else here?" Sarah slid the cigarette butt into her pocket. "Not now," she said, "but maybe recently." They did the tour again, but this time with purpose. Sarah took photos on her phone. Roof damage, mold, cracked pipes, things that screamed money. Things that screamed, "Turn around before this place eats you alive." Still, she couldn't stop herself from touching the carved banister on the main staircase, from staring at the faded mural of constellations above it. Somebody had cared about this place. Somebody in her bloodline. In the old kitchen, with its massive stone hearth and iron hooks and long, abandoned prep tables, Emma spun slowly in a circle. "This one feels like a safe room," she said. "Like we could sleep here." Sarah nodded. "If we ever moved in," Emma finished softly. They didn't talk about how crazy that sounded. They both knew. They ate lunch on the back steps, 2 turkey sandwiches out of a cooler and a pack of pretzels. The air smelled like wet leaves and stone. Birds chattered somewhere up in the towers. Emma leaned into her. "You're thinking hard," she said. "Yeah," Sarah admitted. "About bills?" "About everything." And then the sound cut through the quiet. An engine. No, not an engine. A good engine. Smooth, expensive, controlled. Sarah stood immediately, every muscle going tight. "Emma, inside, now." Emma didn't argue. She grabbed her backpack and ran through the kitchen door, disappearing behind the thick wall. Sarah stayed where she was. The car came into view seconds later, rolling through the overgrown drive like it belonged there. A black Mercedes sedan, shiny in a way nothing else on the property was shiny. It slid to a stop beside Sarah's sun-faded Honda, and for a moment the contrast was almost funny. Then the driver's door opened. The man who stepped out was tall, silver hair cut neat, suit perfect. He didn't look like the kind of person who dropped by. He looked like the kind of person who summoned. "Miss Brennan," he called like they'd already met. "Who are you?" Sarah called back. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "My name is Richard Worthington. I represent a private party that's very interested in this property." No introduction, no warm-up. Straight to business. Her stomach tightened. "Private party," she repeated. "What does that mean?" "Let's say we acquire and manage historically significant estates." "This isn't for sale." "You haven't even heard the offer yet." Sarah crossed her arms. "You drove a long way to make an offer on something I just learned existed 24 hours ago. That should tell you," he said smoothly, "how serious we are." Worthington pulled a small case from his jacket pocket and handed her a business card. The cardstock was thick, embossed. No website, just a name, a personal number, and something else in smaller print, Worthington Holdings and Cultural Recovery. "So," he said, "shall we get to it?" Sarah stared at him. "You don't even want to see inside first?" Something flickered across his face. "I've seen more than enough." Sarah went still. He'd been here, or someone working for him had. Her mind jumped. The cigarette butt, the footprints, the new lock on the small door in the corridor behind the tapestry. "Miss Brennan," Worthington said, voice low, like a confidant, like a friend. "Here is our position. We are prepared to offer you $500,000. Cash. Today. No inspections, no questions. You sign the deed transfer, and you and your daughter walk away with a level of security I think it's fair to say you've never had before." Sarah heard the number, and for a split second her body reacted before her mind did. $500,000. $500,000. Do you know what $500,000 does when you're behind on rent and your transmission is dying and your kid needs new sneakers and you've been pretending everything is fine for years? It solves everything. College, health care, a real house, a backyard, quiet mornings, freedom, Emma. But then the rest of it sank in. No inspection, no questions. Today. That wasn't a deal. That was extraction. "That's a lot of money for a pile of moss and broken glass," Sarah said carefully. Worthington smiled that polite, empty smile. "We like to think generously." "No," she said, "people like you don't do generous. You do leverage." For the first time he actually looked a little pleased. "You're smart," he said softly. "Good. Then you'll understand me when I say this." He stepped closer. Sarah didn't back up. "This place is not safe for you," he said, almost gently. "Thornfield is not a romantic ruin. It is not a fairy tale. It is not a project for a single mother and a child. This property is historically complicated. There are things within these walls worth preserving, and there are people involved who are less polite than I am." Sarah kept her face still. "Is that a threat?" "It's advice," he said. "Take the money and leave, before you become part of a story you don't understand." Her pulse climbed. He didn't know her. He saw single mom, old car, cheap sneakers, and made the same mistake everybody made. He thought she scared easy. "Here's my problem," Sarah said, forcing her voice to stay calm. "I don't sign things I don't understand. And right now I don't understand why you want this place so badly." Worthington held her gaze. For a long time he said nothing. Then, "You really don't know." Something in his tone made a cold line run down her spine. "No," she said quietly, "I don't." Worthington nodded slowly. "All right," he said. "Then I'll be direct with you. A long time ago this property became valuable, not because of the land, not because of the building, because of what was moved here." "What was moved here?" she repeated. "During the war," he said. "World War II. Certain items were brought to this property for safekeeping under unusual arrangements. Some of those items were later misplaced, unaccounted for. They were never recovered." "Items," she said. "Like what? Gold? Weapons?" He smiled faintly. "You're thinking too small." Something hard and ugly flashed behind his eyes for a split second. Not greed, Sarah realized. Possession. "This doesn't need to become messy," he said. "You take the money, you disappear, you never have to think about Thornfield again. You don't take the money. And you stay. Then, sooner or later, you're going to open a door in here that you can't close, and people will come through it. People who are not me." "And you're the nice one," Sarah said flatly. Yes, Worthington said. I am. Silence settled. Wind moved through the trees. Somewhere inside the castle something shifted. An old beam settling or something else. Sarah's mind ran. Fast. He knew about the property before she did. He had people already on site. He knew enough to throw out $500,000 like it was tip money. He spoke about what was moved here like he'd rehearsed it. And he kept using the same word. Items, not memories, not heirlooms. Items, like inventory, like product. She tucked the card into her pocket without looking at it. I'll think about it, she said. Worthington's smile returned. Too smooth, too controlled. Please don't take too long, he said, almost softly. Hesitation invites attention. Attention invites curiosity. And some kinds of curiosity, he said, eyes flicking towards the castle, tend to end badly. He got back into the Mercedes. Gravel popped under the tires. The car slid back down the overgrown path and vanished into the trees. Sarah stood there a full minute after he was gone, trying to slow her breathing. When she finally went back inside, Emma was sitting on the kitchen counter, hugging her backpack, eyes wide. Who was that? She whispered. Nobody. Sarah lied automatically. Just a guy who wanted to buy the house. Emma frowned. I don't like him. Me neither. Are we selling it? Sarah looked at her daughter, really looked at her. The scraped knees, the too small hoodie, the trust. $500,000. Today. Walk away. No questions. That was safety. That was the first good night's sleep in years, but there was something else under that offer. Something that smelled like rot. No, Sarah said, we're not selling, not yet. Emma nodded like she'd expected that answer. Sarah exhaled. Get your shoes on, she said, we're going into town. Why? Because if he knows something I don't, Sarah said, I'm going to fix that. The town wasn't much. A diner, a general store, a mechanic, a bait and tackle place, a post office with peeling paint, and a small brick library with a hand-painted sign out front that read Historical Society, Public Archive. Perfect. Inside, the air was cool and dry, and it smelled like paper and old glue. An older woman sat behind the desk, white hair pinned back, reading a paperback mystery with a cracked spine. Hi, Sarah said, forcing a friendly tone. I'm looking for any records you have on a place called Thornfield. The woman's head snapped up so fast it was almost comical. She squinted. Thornfield Castle? Yes. The woman set her book down very carefully. Honey, she said, nobody's asked about that place in 30 years. Sarah felt her pulse pick up. So, you do have something? The woman pushed herself up from the chair. Follow me. They went into a back room lined with filing cabinets and plastic storage bins. The woman, her name tag said Elaine, pulled down a dusty box labeled Brennan, Thornfield, 1920-1960. When Sarah heard her own last name, Brennan, out loud from someone who wasn't family, it sent a strange chill through her. Elaine carried the box to a long table. You're not from around here? She said casually. No. You family? Sarah swallowed. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Elaine gave her a long, knowing look, then flipped open the lid. The box was full of old photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, brittle letters. Start there, Elaine said, tapping a stack of articles. Those'll give you the shape of it. Sarah sat, and the shape of it hit like a slow, rolling thunder. The earliest clipping was from 1924, and it read like a scandal. Cornelius Brennan imports full European castle, brings mad folly to Maine. The grainy photo showed Thornfield coming together stone by stone, literal crates of carved granite being offloaded and reassembled in the woods. Her great-great-grandfather, Cornelius Brennan. Her blood. There he was in a photograph, a stern man in a dark coat, standing in front of the rosin walls with a hand on his hip. Underneath, someone had scrawled in ink, "Brennan's folly. He'll bankrupt himself trying to impress Washington." Sarah breathed out slowly. The next set of clippings jumped ahead 20 years. 1942, 1943, 1944, the tone changed. Words like government contract, strategic storage, war effort, cultural assets restricted. Then, suddenly, silence. Nothing after 1944. No follow-up. No closure. Like Thornfield had just vanished. Icy pressure coiled in her chest. She looked up. "What does strategic storage mean?" she asked. Elaine made a face. "During the war? Could be anything. Ammunition, fuel, research equipment. I heard my daddy say it was radar stuff, but you didn't hear that from me." Sarah kept reading. One scrap of a column mentioned an investigation after the war, some kind of dispute between the Brennan family and the federal government over property temporarily housed on site under emergency protection protocols. Property. Her hands went cold. Not weapons, not fuel. Property. Worthington's voice came back to her like a whisper. "You're thinking too small." She swallowed. "Was anyone ever charged with anything?" Elaine shook her head. "Not that I ever heard. Your people just disappeared from town. Place stayed shut up after that. Everyone said it was cursed. Cursed. They said if you took something from Thornfield that wasn't yours, you wouldn't live long enough to spend it." Elaine snorted softly. "Small towns invent stories when they're scared." Sarah kept her eyes on the papers, but her mind was way past superstition. She saw it now. Not perfectly, but enough. Her great-great-grandfather had brought the castle here brick by brick, almost gone broke doing it, and then, during World War II, the U.S. government started using Thornfield for something classified, something to do with property. After the war, there'd been a fight, and then silence. And now, decades later, a man in a Mercedes had shown up with $500,000 and menacing advice. This wasn't a joke inheritance. This was a live wire. Sarah stayed in the archive for almost 2 hours, photographing every clipping on her phone. Emma sat beside her quietly most of that time, sketching little turrets and arched windows in her notebook. When Sarah was finished, she looked at Elaine. "Can I ask you something else?" Elaine leaned on her elbows. "You can ask." "Have you seen anyone else asking about Thornfield recently?" Elaine didn't answer right away. Her jaw tightened a little. "A man in a suit," Sarah added. "Silver hair, expensive watch. Talks like he's doing you a favor by threatening you." Elaine huffed. "Yeah," she said. "He was here last week. Didn't give a name. Said he was researching a historical site for preservation. I told him we don't check out the Brennan files. He didn't like that." Sarah's stomach dropped. Last week. He'd been circling this before Theodore was even in the ground. Which meant either Uncle Theodore had told someone, or someone had been watching Uncle Theodore. Or someone had been watching the castle itself all along, just waiting for the deed to legally move. None of those options felt good. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly. Elaine studied her face. "You're in over your head, aren't you, honey?" Sarah let out a shaky breath. "Yeah," she admitted. "A little." Elaine's gaze softened. "Then hear me. Whatever you think you found out there, don't talk about it in town. This place leaks faster than a screen door. You understand me?" Sarah nodded. I understand. Back in the Honda, Emma buckled herself in and turned sideways in her seat. Mom? Yeah, baby. What if that man comes back? Sarah looked at her daughter. The question wasn't small, neither was the answer. He will, Sarah said. Emma swallowed. What are we going to do? Sarah started the car. The engine coughed twice, then caught. She gripped the wheel, jaw set. We're going to figure out why a worthless castle is worth $500,000 in cash to a stranger, she said, and then we're going to make sure nobody takes it from us. They drove back up the winding road to Thornfield at dusk. The sky was going purple. The trees threw long shadows across the stone. The castle rose ahead of them like a dark spine against the fading light. Sarah killed the engine. Okay, she whispered. Here's the plan. Emma leaned in. We stay in one room tonight. The kitchen. We lock the doors. We keep my phone charged. If anyone shows up who isn't law enforcement, you go to the pantry and you stay there until I tell you to come out. Emma nodded, serious. Tomorrow, Sarah said, heart hammering now, we open that door behind the tapestry. Because she knew in her bones that whatever answer Worthington thought he owned, it was on the other side of that lock, and if it was, then she needed to see it first, before anyone else did, before anyone tried to take it. They settled in the kitchen that night with 2 sleeping bags, a battery lantern, and the one working outlet Sarah had found near the old stove. Wind moved through the broken windows like whispers. The stone walls held the cold. Emma curled up close. Mom? She murmured. Yeah. Are you scared? Sarah stared into the flicker of the lantern light. Yeah, she said softly, but we're staying anyway. Hours later, long after Emma's breathing had gone slow and even, Sarah lay awake on the hard floor of her inherited ruin, one hand wrapped around the brass key. She was still scared, but under it, clearer now than fear, was something else. Anger. Someone thought she could be pushed out, bought off, moved like a pawn. Someone thought this place, her place, was theirs by default. Someone thought they could threaten her and her child and walk away with what was inside these walls. No. She stared up into the dark and made herself a promise. Tomorrow she was opening that door. And once she knew what was inside, nobody was ever taking Thornfield from her again. The storm rolled in before dawn, hammering the castle roof with sheets of rain that sounded like fists pounding against steel. Sarah sat by the dying fire in the kitchen, listening to the water run through the cracks in the stone, thinking about everything she'd read the day before. Her great-great-grandfather, Cornelius Brennan. Government contracts. Strategic storage. Property. The word still echoed in her mind, sharp and wrong. Emma stirred under her blanket, half awake. Mom, she mumbled. Sarah turned from the fire. Yeah, baby? Did we make a mistake coming here? Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to lie, to say no, but she couldn't. We'll find out, she said quietly. Sometimes you have to walk into the storm to see what's on the other side. By mid-morning, the rain had stopped. The castle steamed in the weak sunlight like a living creature drying after a long sleep. Sarah pulled on her jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and motioned for Emma to follow. Where are we going? To find out what's behind that little door. The hallway was darker than she remembered. Moss glistened on the stones and the smell of damp wood filled the air. The tapestry that hid the small door sagged like tired skin. Sarah pulled it aside and stared at the lock. It was strange. Modern, yes, but more than that. The metal had been deliberately engraved around the keyhole with patterns she hadn't noticed before. 8 sharp points radiating like petals. Emma stood beside her, clutching her flashlight. "It looks like a flower." "Or a star," Sarah said softly. She crouched, running her fingers along the edges. Her heart thudded. The brass key that had opened the castle's main door rested heavy in her pocket. She took it out and held it up next to the carving. The handle bore the Brennan family crest, a compass rose. She'd thought it was just decoration. Now she wasn't so sure. "Mom," Emma said, "what if it's a clue?" Sarah smiled faintly. "That's exactly what I was thinking." She turned the key in her hand, aligning the compass so that the north mark faced upward, matching the tiny etched N above the lock. Still, it didn't fit. The shaft was too wide. She sighed, leaning closer. Then she saw it. A faint seam running round the handle, nearly invisible under years of wear. Her pulse quickened. She twisted the handle. It moved. A small click echoed in the silence. The ornate head of the key separated, revealing a second, smaller key hidden inside. Sarah stared at it, barely breathing. "Only a true Brennan would think to look," she whispered. Emma gasped. "You did it!" Sarah fit the hidden key into the lock. It turned easily, like it had been waiting. With a heavy click, the door released. Dust fell in slow spirals as she pushed it open. A blast of cold, stale air rushed out, air that hadn't moved in decades. The beam of Sarah's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing steps descending into the earth. "Mom," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "It's okay," Sarah said, though her own heart hammered in her chest. "Stay close." They went down slowly. The stairs were narrow, made of stone, slick with moisture. The smell of old paper and oil grew stronger with every step. At the bottom, the passage opened into a chamber. It wasn't a basement. It was a vault. Filing cabinets lined one wall, rusted but intact. Tables stood covered in tarps. Shelves sagged under the weight of boxes. Sarah walked to the nearest table and pulled back the canvas. Beneath it lay a stack of wooden crates, each stamped with faded numbers and foreign words: French, German, Dutch. Her flashlight beam swept across the next table. Paintings. She froze. Even under dust and darkness, the colors glowed. Blues and golds, thick brushstrokes alive with movement. A small plaque on one frame bore a familiar name: Monet. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. "Oh my God!" She moved to the next one. Renoir. Another. Rembrandt. The realization hit her like lightning. These weren't reproductions, they were originals. "Mom," Emma said softly, eyes wide. "Are they real?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yeah, baby. They're real." She found a desk piled with folders. Many were labeled Classified, Operation Safeguard. She flipped one open. Inside were government contracts dated 1943, signed by her great-great-grandfather. The papers detailed a wartime program to safeguard valuable cultural artifacts, art, documents, and historical items in the event of Nazi invasion. Her hands shook as she read. Cornelius Brennan had turned Thornfield Castle into a secret government repository for rescued European art, but the final entries told a darker story. By 1945, some officials had tried to claim the art for themselves. Cornelius refused. He hid the most valuable pieces in this vault, vowing they would only be revealed when a true Brennan reclaimed the property. Sarah closed the folder, dizzy. The weight of generations pressed on her. This was what Worthington wanted. Not the land, the treasure hidden beneath it. She looked at Emma, who was staring up at a painting illuminated by the flashlight beam. It was a pastoral scene, a woman by a riverbank. "It's beautiful," Emma whispered. "Why would anyone hide something so beautiful?" "To protect it," Sarah said, "from people who only see the price tag." She turned toward the stairs, mind racing. "We need to get out of here. Now." But before they reached the top, a sound echoed through the hall above them. Footsteps, slow, heavy, measured. Emma clutched her mother's arm. "Mom?" Sarah switched off the flashlight, plunging them into darkness. The footsteps grew louder, closer, then stopped. A man's voice, muffled but distinct, drifted down the stairwell. "Miss Brennan," he said smoothly, "I told you curiosity could be dangerous." It was Worthington. Sarah's pulse roared in her ears. She held Emma close, breathing as quietly as she could. "Do you know what's down there?" Worthington continued, his tone almost calm. "What your family buried. It's not yours to protect. It never was." A pause. Then the faint metallic sound of a gun's safety clicking off. Sarah's body went cold. She leaned close to Emma's ear and whispered, "When I tell you to run, you run to the kitchen and lock the door. But do exactly what I say." The floor above creaked. Worthington's shoes scraped against the stone. He was moving toward the stairs. Sarah's hand brushed the small flashlight, its weight suddenly comforting. She turned it over in her palm, gripping it like a weapon. She looked up toward the faint slice of light at the top of the stairwell and saw a shadow move across it. Worthington was coming down. Her heart hammered. She waited until she could see the glint of his shoe, then swung the flashlight with everything she had. It slammed into his leg with a dull crack. He stumbled, swore, and fell backward, his shoulder hitting the wall. "Run!" she shouted. Emma bolted up the stairs, her small feet flying. Sarah grabbed the nearest object, a wooden crate, and shoved it toward the doorway, blocking the stairwell. Worthington shouted something, his voice furious, but she didn't wait to hear the rest. She ran after Emma, up through the hall, heart pounding. They burst out into the courtyard, the gray sky breaking into another wave of rain. "Get in the car!" Sarah yelled. Emma scrambled into the Honda. Sarah jumped in, turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, then caught. In the rear-view mirror, Worthington appeared at the castle entrance, limping, soaked, his expression murderous. Sarah hit the gas. The tires skidded on wet gravel, then gripped. The castle shrank in the mirror, swallowed by the trees. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Rain hammered the windshield, wipers squealing. Finally, Emma whispered, "Mom, what's going to happen?" Sarah gripped the wheel tighter, the brass key cold against her palm. "We're going to make sure the right people know what's in that castle," she said, "and then we're going to make sure no one like him ever touches it again." As the forest closed around them, thunder rolled over the mountains. Sarah didn't look back. She had unlocked the past, and now the past was coming for her. They couldn't go back to the motel. That was Sarah's first clear thought once her hands stopped shaking enough to keep the car steady on the rain-slick road. The motel had a front desk, cameras, people. People could talk. People could be bought. Worthington didn't feel like the kind of man who gave up. He felt like the kind of man who escalated. So, instead of turning toward town, she turned off onto an unmarked logging road and killed the lights. The car idled in the dark, ticking softly. Emma sat curled in the passenger seat, seatbelt still on, backpack hugged to her chest like a shield. Her face was pale, her eyes huge. She hadn't said a word since they'd pulled away from the castle. Not when Sarah ran that makeshift blockade at the base of the stairs. Not when she saw Worthington with a gun. Not even when the car nearly fishtailed on the wet dirt and spun before catching again. Now, in the quiet, she finally whispered, "Mom, is he going to hurt us?" Sarah swallowed. Her throat felt raw. "No," she said. "Are you sure?" "No." Yes, Sarah said. Emma nodded once, as if she could force herself to believe that. Sarah leaned her head back against the car seat and let herself feel it for just a second. Fear. Not the usual fear. Bills, rent, food, school supplies, old car noises. This was different. This had weight. This had teeth. This kind of fear tasted metallic. This kind of fear said, you and your child might not make it out of this if you do the wrong thing next. And under it, something hotter. Anger. He came into her house. He came into her family's history. He walked into her bloodline like it was his hallway. No, enough. Sarah sat up, dug her phone out of her jacket, and opened the Notes app where she'd taken pictures of the documents from the vault. Operation Safeguard, government contracts, cultural assets, paintings cataloged and protected in 1943. Transfer orders that never happened because Cornelius Brennan said no. She scrolled. Then she stopped. There it was. FBI Art Crime Team, point of contact, East Coast Division, a name, a number, probably some old procedural reference from the 90s, judging by the formatting, back when the vault had last even been touched. Sarah exhaled. Okay, this is how we do it. No more hiding, no more guessing, no more letting rich men walk in and tell her what belonged to them. We're going to make a call, she told Emma. Emma glanced up. To who? To people who put guys like him in handcuffs. She dialed. It rang twice. Then a bored male voice answered, Art Crime, Special Agent Miller. My name is Sarah Brennan, she said, voice low, steady, controlled. I need help. Right now. I'm sitting on stolen World War II art in a private vault inside Thornfield Castle in Aroostook County, Maine, and a man just tried to force his way in with a gun. He says it belongs to him. It doesn't. I have catalog records dating back to 1943 that say this was federal protective storage under Operation Safeguard and that my great-great-grandfather, Cornelius Brennan, was the custodian. I can give you file numbers if you want, but if you take too long, he's coming back with more men. Silence. For a few seconds, nothing but the low hiss of rain on the windshield. Then the voice on the other end changed. What's your location? Miller asked. Sarah gave the closest thing to an address Thornfield had. The road, the mile marker, the iron gate that used to have a crest but didn't anymore because it had fallen off. Who is the armed party? He asked. Name he gave me is Richard Worthington. He says he represents collectors. I think he represents thieves. Is your child safe right now? Sarah felt something inside her twist. She's with me. She's 8. She saw him draw on us. She's scared. Are you at the castle now? No, but he is. Or he will be. He knows what's down there. Another long pause. She could almost hear him thinking. Miss Brennan, Miller said, voice now clipped, professional, fast. Listen very carefully. Do not re-enter the property alone. Do not confront this man again. Do not allow anyone else access. We are en route. I'm dispatching state police to secure exterior access points until we arrive. You will stay nearby and you will answer your phone when I call. Do you understand me? Yes, Sarah said. Good, he said. And, Miss Brennan? Yeah? You did the right thing. The call ended. Sarah exhaled so hard she shook. Emma's voice was small. Are they coming? Yes, Sarah said. Today? Yes, Sarah said, and this time she didn't feel like she was lying. They waited there on that dirt road for almost an hour, long enough for the adrenaline crash to hit, long enough for Emma to fall asleep against the door with her head on her backpack, long enough for the sky to lighten from storm gray to dull pewter. Then Sarah saw it. Headlights. Not one pair. Several. Coming up the long road toward Thornfield. Not slow. Fast. Her stomach dropped. No way that was the FBI. Too early. Too soon. No, that was him. He brought help. He brought muscle. Her hands tightened on the wheel. She flicked her eyes to Emma, still asleep, then back to the distant trail of headlights. She had two choices. Run or end this. Running meant abandoning Thornfield, abandoning the vault, abandoning proof. If she drove away now and Worthington emptied that vault, then the record would be whatever he chose to leave behind. He'd call it recovery. He'd call it rightful possession. He'd call her a trespasser who broke into his facility, and nobody would believe her. A single mom in the beat-up car never wins when the rich man writes the story first. No, not this time. "Baby," she whispered, touching Emma's shoulder, "wake up, we're going back." Emma jerked up fast, panicked for a split second. "What? What's wrong?" "Seatbelt," Sarah said. "Now." They tore back down the dirt cut-through and onto the main road. Gravel spat up behind them. Damp branches slapped the side of the Honda. Sarah turned hard onto the long drive to Thornfield. Trees whipping by. By the time the castle came into view, the first motorcycles were already in the courtyard. There were 4 of them. Matte black, loud, aggressive. The men getting off them moved like they weren't worried about being seen. Behind them, an SUV idled with tinted windows. Worthington was already there. He stood in the open, coat on despite the humidity, calm and collected, like this was nothing but an annoying errand. Sarah pulled her car in fast and angled it across the courtyard, blocking part of the main entrance. She got out before Emma could, slammed her door, and planted herself between the strangers and the big oak doors of her castle. "Miss Brennan," Worthington said smoothly. "Good. I was afraid you'd done something impulsive." "Get off my property," she said. He actually laughed. "Your property," he said softly. "Do you hear yourself?" "Yeah," she said, "I do." The men with him weren't joking. One was already looking past her, scanning the entryway, calculating. Another shifted his jacket just enough for Sarah to see the grip of a handgun. Emma stayed in the car like she'd been told, wide-eyed, watching. Worthington spread his hands like he was being patient. "Let me make this simple," he said. "You are in possession of materials that were promised to my clients decades ago. My clients have waited a long time. My clients have invested a lot of money ensuring these pieces stayed protected from idiots who would mishandle them. We are here to finalize that transfer. Now, today." "They were never yours," Sarah said. "They were hidden from people like you." His eyes flashed, just for a second. Annoyance. "Miss Brennan," he said, voice cooling, "you are in way over your head. You think this is about some fairy tale of lost treasure and family destiny. It's not. It's paperwork. It's ownership. It's signatures made in rooms you'll never walk into. Decisions were made long before you were even born. You're standing in the middle of a deal that is older than you are, and you're not going to stop it by being sentimental." Sarah stared at him, then she smiled. "Yeah," she said. "Here's the thing." His jaw tightened a fraction. "I called the FBI." The words hit him harder than she expected. For a fraction of a second, his face cracked. Not much, but enough. Something sharp flickered in his eyes. He recovered fast. "No, you didn't," he said. "Yes," Sarah said. "I did. Art Crime Division. I gave them the file names. I gave them dates. I gave them signatures. I gave them Operation Safeguard." She took one slow step forward. "And I told them you were here." The air shifted. The men by the motorcycles straightened, glancing toward the tree line toward the road. Worthington's voice dropped. "You shouldn't have done that." "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I did it for the people those paintings were taken from." "This is not about the Holocaust," he snapped too fast. There it was. Sarah's stomach turned. "Yes," she said quietly, "it is." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then one of the men muttered, "We don't have time for this," and reached inside his jacket. Sarah didn't think. She just moved. She grabbed the nearest thing, a broken length of stone molding lying near the steps, and lifted it like a bat. "You pull that gun in front of my kid," she said, voice low and shaken, "and I swear to God I'll—" Sirens. They cut through the trees like a blade, loud, close, many. Worthington's men moved instantly, melting toward the bikes, toward the SUV. One swore. Another yanked his hand back from his jacket like it had burned him. Worthington didn't run. He turned his head and listened. Sarah did too. That wasn't one cruiser. That was a convoy. State police first. 2 black and white units tearing up the dirt drive. Lights screaming red and blue across the stone. Behind them, unmarked vehicles. Dark, low, federal. Worthington exhaled through his nose, anger flashing across his face like heat lightning. Then he looked at Sarah. "This," he said softly, "was stupid. This," Sarah said, "was mine." The first cruiser skidded into the courtyard, tires spitting mud. Doors flew open. "Hands where I can see them," an officer shouted. "Do not reach." Everything happened fast after that. Worthington's guys tried to mount the bikes, but 2 agents in tactical vests were already on them, weapons up, barking orders. One of the bikers froze. One didn't. He went for the throttle. He didn't get far. An agent slammed him off the seat and into the gravel. The SUV tried to back out, but another car blocked the exit at the gate. "Federal agents," someone yelled. "Drop the weapon." "I don't have a—" "Drop it." Clatter. Hands up. Knees on gravel. Emma watched from the Honda, both hands over her mouth. Sarah stood in the open, shaking so hard now she could barely keep the stone bar in her grip. The sirens died one by one, leaving only the thrum of engines and the metallic clink of cuffs being locked. An agent in a dark jacket approached her. Badge up, steady, assessing. "Ma'am, are you Miss Brennan?" Sarah swallowed. "Yeah." "I'm Special Agent Miller," he said. "You and your daughter are safe now. You're all right." Safe. The word hit her so hard it nearly took her knees. She let the piece of stone drop from her hands. It hit the ground with a dull thud. Miller glanced toward the castle. "The vault," he said quietly. "It's inside?" "Yes," Sarah said. "Second floor corridor, door behind the tapestry. The lock's open." He nodded once and signaled to another agent. Teams started moving inside with purpose, controlled, efficient, not like intruders, like protectors. Worthington watched all of it like a man trying very hard not to look trapped. Miller turned to him. "Richard Worthington?" he asked. Worthington straightened his cuffs. "On whose authority are you—" "On the authority of the United States government," Miller said flatly, "and international cultural property law. You're being detained, pending investigation into trafficking of stolen art and conspiracy to obstruct recovery of wartime assets." Worthington's composure faltered just for a breath. "You don't understand what you're mishandling," he hissed. "You don't understand the level of money involved. You don't understand who is going to be calling you in the next hour." Miller didn't blink. "Sir," he said, "you don't understand how little I care." Sarah almost laughed. Almost. Her body wouldn't quite let her. Instead, she staggered back toward the car. Emma flung the door open and launched herself out, running straight into her mother's arms. Sarah dropped to her knees in the mud and held her like the world was trying to pull her away. Emma was shaking. "Are we okay?" she whispered into Sarah's jacket. "Mom, are we okay?" Sarah closed her eyes and pressed her face into her daughter's hair. Rain, dirt, sweat, fear. "Yes," she breathed. "We're okay. We're okay, baby. I've got you." For a long time, they stayed like that. Mother and daughter in the center of a stone courtyard older than both of them, surrounded by flashing lights and federal agents, while armed men were led away in cuffs. Eventually, Miller approached again, gentler now. "Miss Brennan," he said quietly, "I'm going to be very honest with you. This is about to get loud. News loud, court loud, politics loud. You're sitting on something that people have been trying to get their hands on for 80 years. Sarah nodded without lifting her face from Emma's hair. "I figured." "We're going to secure the vault," he continued. "We're going to document every piece. We're going to start the process of identifying rightful ownership. There are going to be museums involved, European governments, families. It's going to be a lot." "I don't care about a lot," Sarah said. "I just care that nobody takes it and buries it again." Miller's mouth pulled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't cold either. "That," he said, "is exactly why you're the first call on the paperwork from now on." Sarah looked up at him then. "Miss Brennan," he said seriously, "you just protected evidence of cultural theft that stretches back to the Holocaust. Some of these pieces were never supposed to see daylight again. You change that. Your daughter is going to read about this in her history textbook." Emma lifted her head. "Can I tell my teacher that?" she asked. Miller actually smiled. "Yeah, kid," he said, "you can tell your teacher that." Emma nodded, satisfied, and leaned back against her mother. Something in Sarah's chest finally let go, not all the way, but enough to breathe without shaking. She glanced past Miller at Worthington. 2 agents were guiding him toward one of the unmarked cars. He still held his chin high, still wore that veil of control like a suit jacket. But underneath, in his eyes, for the first time since she met him, she saw it. Fear. Good, she thought. Good. As the agents moved into the castle and crime scene tapes started going up across her own front doors, Sarah sat back against the Honda with Emma in her lap and watched the courtyard of Thornfield Castle fill with law enforcement, evidence bags, and the flash of camera shutters. It felt unreal. It felt impossible. It felt, in a way she hadn't felt in years, like safety. Not because danger was gone. It wasn't. The danger had just been named out loud, dragged into daylight, put in cuffs. That was different than safety, but it was close enough for right now. Miller crouched beside them. "One more thing," he said quietly. "There's going to be press. I can't stop that. They're probably already on their way. You don't have to talk to anyone, not today, not tomorrow. Let us handle the noise." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now," Miller said, "now we get you and your daughter somewhere secure for the night. And then, Miss Brennan," he said, glancing up at the castle, "we start the paperwork to make sure the whole country knows whose name is on this deed." Sarah let out a slow breath. For the first time since she'd walked into Mr. Harrison's office and taken that heavy brass key in her hand, she let herself feel something that wasn't fear, anger, or exhaustion. Pride. They had tried to scare her out of her own blood. They had tried to buy her silence. They had tried to walk in and take what wasn't theirs, and instead they were the ones being loaded into cars. She looked down at Emma, who was still holding on like she was afraid to let go. "We're okay," Sarah whispered again. Emma nodded against her. Mom? Yeah? Does this mean, Emma said, voice small but steady, that we get to stay? Sarah looked up at Thornfield. The moss, the stone, the cracked windows, the broken roof lines, the scars of neglect, and felt it settle into her the way a final decision does. Yes, she said. Emma closed her eyes and smiled into her mother's jacket. Sirens faded, engines idled. Agents moved in and out of the door behind the old tapestry, carrying the past into daylight. Sarah held her daughter and watched them work. They weren't just protecting art, they were protecting proof. Proof that Cornelius Brennan had been more than Brennan's folly. Proof that her family hadn't been thieves, they'd been guardians. Proof that this place wasn't a joke inheritance, it was a legacy, and from this moment on, the whole world would know it. The world found out about Thornfield Castle before Sarah even had time to breathe. By the next morning, reporters swarmed the gates, their cameras flashing through the misty Maine air. Headlines spread faster than she could read them. Single mother uncovers hidden Wahwetu art cache. The Brennan legacy, $45 million in lost masterpieces found. From waitress to heroine, the woman who defied an empire. Sarah watched it all unfold from the top window of the East Tower, still wearing the same clothes from the day before. Down below, law enforcement vans came and went, loading carefully packed crates into armored trucks. Federal agents cataloged each piece, one by one. Historians whispered reverently over the works of Monet, Renoir, and Rembrandt that had been locked away for nearly a century. Emma stood beside her mother, watching through the glass. "Are they taking everything?" she asked quietly. "Not everything," Sarah said. "Just what doesn't belong to us." The castle was full of footsteps again, but this time they weren't intruders. They were caretakers. Agents, curators, museum representatives, people who handled history like it was something alive. When Agent Miller arrived that afternoon, he looked different. Tired, but satisfied. "You did good, Miss Brennan," he said. "You saved something the world forgot existed." Sarah smiled faintly. "Feels like I just got lucky." He shook his head. "Luck doesn't pick up the phone. Courage does." He explained what would happen next. The vault's contents would be moved to federal custody for authentication and repatriation. Many of the works would go home, to Poland, to France, to families who had lost everything in the war. Others would remain in the United States, in museums that could trace their rightful donation records. "And the rest?" Sarah asked. Miller handed her a folder. Inside were papers bearing her name. The pieces Cornelius Brennan purchased before the war. They're legally yours. And there's compensation. Finder's fees, restitution, even insurance settlements that were never closed. Once it's processed, you'll be more than comfortable. Sarah looked at him stunned. "How comfortable?" He smiled. "Enough to restore this place and then some." When the officials finally left, the castle felt different. The silence that followed wasn't the emptiness of before. It was peace. Weeks turned into months. The investigations continued, and so did the work at Thornfield. Local contractors came, eager to be part of history. Sarah hired them all. Roofers, carpenters, stonemasons, men and women who'd once laughed at her inheritance now lined up to help rebuild it. Money from the settlements flowed in, and the castle began to heal. The first wing to be completed was a library. They scrubbed away the mold and grime to reveal frescoes beneath, vivid depictions of constellations and oceans painted by Cornelius himself. Sarah had the vault door sealed again, this time with new locks and security cameras. It wasn't a secret anymore, but it was still sacred. By spring, Thornfield was alive. Sunlight spilled through clean windows for the first time in 40 years. Birds nested in the towers. The great hall echoed again, this time with laughter. On Emma's 10th birthday, they threw a party there. The long oak table was covered with food. Local kids ran through the halls, chasing echoes of their own voices. Adults mingled, shaking Sarah's hand, some apologizing for ever doubting her. She accepted their smiles politely, but the real joy was watching Emma. Her daughter darted between the guests, laughing freely, her curls bouncing as she showed her friends the castle her mom saved. When the crowd thinned out, Sarah and Emma climbed the narrow stairway to the highest balcony. The sky stretched above them, pale gold fading into rose. The forest below shimmered with evening light. "Mom," Emma said softly, "remember when everyone laughed at us?" Sarah smiled. Hard to forget. "They're not laughing now." Sarah turned to her, and the wind brushing her hair back. "You know what, baby? I don't even care. They saw what was broken. We saw what could be." Emma grinned. "Like Uncle Theodore." Exactly like Uncle Theodore. Below them, the castle's walls glowed with sunset. Once, they'd been ruins. Now, they were a monument to courage, to stubbornness, to hope. The following year, Thornfield Castle reopened as a private research museum. Scholars came from all over the world to study Operation Safeguard, to learn how one man, and decades later one woman, had defied greed and time itself to protect beauty from destruction. At the heart of it all hung one final painting, the only one Sarah refused to let go of. It wasn't a masterpiece by a famous artist. It was a simple landscape, signed in a faded hand. Cornelius Brennan, 1924. The view was unmistakable. Thornfield Castle before the moss, before the rot. And at the bottom, in neat script, he'd written, "For the Brennan who finds this, you were worth waiting for." Every morning, sunlight hit that painting first. Sarah made sure of it. 2 years later, the castle stood stronger than ever. The vault's recovered art had found its rightful homes. The name Brennan, once whispered as a warning, was now a symbol of integrity and resilience. Reporters still called sometimes, wanting interviews, TV rights, book deals. Sarah said no to all of them. The story didn't need embellishment. It had already been written, in the dust and stone of Thornfield itself. Late one evening, she sat on the same balcony with Emma, who had grown taller now, her eyes full of light. "Do you miss our old apartment?" Emma asked suddenly. Sarah thought about it, the leaky bathroom, the noise, the loneliness. She smiled. "No, but I remember it. It's where we learned how to keep going." Emma leaned against her shoulder. "So, what's next?" Sarah looked out over the dark forest. The castle's lanterns glowed below, soft and warm. "Whatever comes," she said, "we're ready." The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and pine. Somewhere inside the castle, the clock struck 10, echoing through the halls. Thornfield wasn't silent anymore. It was alive, reborn from ruin into legacy. And Sarah knew, deep down, that Uncle Theodore had never meant to leave her just a building. He had left her a lesson. That what others call worthless rubble might just be the foundation of something extraordinary. As the stars appeared over the towers, Sarah took Emma's hand and whispered, "We woke it up, baby." And in the hush of the night, it almost felt like the castle answered back. What started as a cruel family joke became the discovery of a lifetime. Sarah Brennan didn't just inherit a castle. She uncovered history, justice, and hope. Sometimes the treasures we find aren't gold or paintings, but proof that courage changes everything. If you loved this story, hit like, share it with a friend, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story will move you even more. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from.